Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We got 2 hours of open forum for you today where anybody can call with any question. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Second hour, Mark Brumley will be here with us. First hour, it's Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cy Kellett.
Have you gotten used to doing this show later yet? Or is it still weird?
No, it's not too weird. Not anymore. I'm getting used to, because for me, since I'm now in the central time zone, hour 1 is 5 p.m. and hour 2 is 6 p.m. for me, as opposed to 3 and 4 p.m. when I was living in California.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a little different. It's like, okay, I get to the end of the workday and then I got to work some more. But I'm getting used to it.
Well, we're glad you're here. Open forum, that means you can ask Jimmy whatever you like, 888-318-7884. Okay, this is a Thursday. We've had you on different days of the week recently, but it is a Thursday, so I can ask, what's dropping tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
It's our 5th anniversary. Technically,
yeah.
today is our 5th anniversary, but since tomorrow's Friday, we're celebrating it with a special episode where our audience is more than 100,000 listeners now, and so I invited them to send in their mysterious experiences, and boy, did they. They sent in video and audio files and emails, and when I put the emails alone into a Word document, it was 80 pages single-spaced. So I'm saving some of the experiences for the future, but I took a selection of them and made an episode out of them where we let folks present what it was that happened to them, what was their experience, and then I offer a few thoughts, like if this was a conventional experience, here are some things that might explain it, but if it's an unconventional experience, a paranormal or supernatural one, here's the category it would go in, and things like that.
All right, cool. So tomorrow, get the new episode, the 5th anniversary episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. If you want to check it out, just go to mysterious.fm. If you want to talk with Jimmy now, just call 888-318-7884. I mean, look, I haven't even looked at the phones yet. Oh, there's lines open. We got lines open, which is unusual on a Thursday when Jimmy's here. So yeah, pick up that phone.
We are only 3 minutes in, so.
I know, but I'm a little spoiled with you, Jimmy, because usually the lines are full by now. Usually the calls start before you get on the air. Like
one of them did.
Edgar, let's go to him. Greg in Santa Clarita, California, watching on YouTube. Glad you're here, Greg. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy. Oh, sorry, my computer will not work. Will you put line 1 on for me? Greg, you there with us?
I am here. Can
All
you
right.
hear me?
Yeah, we got you now. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, perfect. So, hey, Jimmy, my question is this. Revision number 2267 of the Catechism regarding the death penalty. Why was it changed? What does it really mean pragmatically? And should anyone even care?
Okay, so we got 3 questions there. The first one, why was it changed? And the basic answer to that is, well, there's been a shift in recent decades on the part of popes regarding and others in the magisterium, but particularly on the part of popes regarding the application of the death penalty. Traditionally, it has been regarded, the use of capital punishment has been regarded as legitimate, both for purposes of administering justice to the offender and for purposes of protecting society from future offenses. Against grave offenses against life, like putting a murderer to death so he can't murder anybody else. Well, that's the traditional position. And in the time of John Paul II, when the first edition of the Catechism was released in 1992, there was already this shift underway. And that's actually something you can observe in the text of paragraph 2267 in the 1992 edition of the Catechism, because it says that one of the conditions that needs to be met for capital punishment to be legitimate is it can only be applied if this is the only possible way to protect human life against an unjust aggressor. So what that does is it omits the earlier and excludes the earlier allowance of capital punishment in the case for purposes of administering justice. So you killed someone, now you need to die in justice. It's not simply for purposes of protecting society, it was also for purposes of justice. And now that's gone in the 1992 version of the Catechism. Subsequently, there was continuing discussion of this, and by the time of Pope Francis, he wanted to eliminate even any application of capital punishment, and so he had the Catechism altered to say that the death penalty is not admissible. And exactly what that means is unclear. The magisterium hasn't really offered an explanation of what that means, which, to be frank, is not that typical, not that untypical of the way the magisterium operates. Often it will make a decision and it will announce a teaching, and then it will leave it up to theologians to provide a rationale for the teaching and to make sense of it. You often have magisterial decisions where, the magisterium wants to move in a certain direction, but they don't want to overcommit themselves to a particular rationale for it. And so they'll leave it up to others to try to figure out the exact parameters of the new position and what the reasons for the new position are. And that's essentially what's happened in this case. So that's the answer to your first question. Why has this happened? Well, there's been this ongoing movement in the magisterium, and particularly among the popes, to want to restrict the use of capital punishment. I should mention there was also another intermediate step in there where even after the Catechism was released in 1992, Pope John Paul II issued an encyclical called Evangelium Vitae on the subject of human life. And one of the things that got modified there was, even though he didn't say there are no situations where capital punishment could be applied, John Paul II questioned whether there are any remaining situations where it could be applied under the new criterion, given the ability of modern states to imprison people for life, for example. So that's the basic answer to why it's changed. Your second question was, what practical difference does it make? Well, if one is taking the Catechism's position seriously, then that would mean you can't ever apply capital punishment today. It's inadmissible. You can, again, question what that would mean and why is it inadmissible, but bottom line, if you're taking the Catechism's position seriously, then you shouldn't be applying capital punishment. On the other hand, if you're not taking the Catechism's position seriously, then it's not really going to make much of a practical difference for you. In terms of should anybody care, your third question, well, human life is an important issue, and so one should definitely care about this subject, regardless of whether one agrees or disagrees with the Catechism's position. It's dealing with an important issue, even though in the developed world, capital punishment is quite rare. It is important to have a clear understanding of the principles under which life can be taken, and so one should care about this issue for that reason, regardless of the position one takes.
Greg, I'm going to say thanks and leave it there because it's time for our first break. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Father John Trigilio. We need Catholic radio because it's a lifeline to Holy Mother Church. Catholic radio enables us to know what the Church teaches, but also to have solidarity with one another. It is one way that we express our commonality, our communio, that we are family, and by staying together, we can be God's children here on earth.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's exactly 6 weeks until we kick off the 9th annual Catholic Answers Apologetics Conference. And man, are we excited. Conference time is the best time of the year. If you've never been, you need to come. And if you've come in the past, chances are you are coming back. please accept our personal invitation to the conference in September. The theme is I Believe in God. We have wonderful guests, including Dr. Scott Hahn and Sister Regina Marie Gorman, and all of our apologists will be there. CatholicAnswersConference.com is the place to go to make your reservation. CatholicAnswersConference.com. It's open forum this hour and next here on Catholic Answers. Your question is very welcome, whether you're Catholic or not. 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. John in Oklahoma up next. John, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Jimmy, one of the most troubling things that I've seen, perhaps in my life, was the incident with the Pachamama statue in the Vatican Gardens, where there appeared to be worship offered to that wooden, idol or statue, whatever you wish to call it, in the presence of the Pope and cardinals. I've never heard an adequate or even a basic defense of that. Do you have any idea what their justification for that kind of thing was? Thank you.
Yeah, I do. And I have to say, I understand your concern here because the optics of the incident, the way they were portrayed, especially in certain parts of Catholic media, including by various internet Catholics who ought to know better, but have some hostility towards the current pontificate and who are not following the catechisms and, frankly, the moral law as a requirement to give things a favorable interpretation and seeking to understand them from the perspective of the people who were involved in an action and what they were doing and trying to do and what they were not trying to do. They just hauled off and said, this is an idol and these people are worshiping it. And they misled a bunch of people into thinking that was the case. But that was not the case. The statue, it was not an idol, even though you could hear other Catholic people say it was, that really was not well grounded. What it was a symbol of Mother Earth. In the local languages down there, Pachamama means Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is a personification of the planet we live on. We use Mother Earth even in English. If you watch, I think it's Charlotte's Web, they even have a song in there about Mother Earth and Father Time. And so Mother Earth is a common way of personifying the world we live in. And there's nothing wrong with personifying the earth. In fact, you find various personifications of things in nature or things about the world, sometimes even abstract ones like wisdom, in the Old Testament itself. So you find biblical personifications that are not understood as deities and that are not understood to be literally true. This is just a symbol of something else. So, for example, in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is personified as a woman who is, of course, a wise woman, but it's not like there's a goddess named Wisdom, and having texts in Proverbs praising wisdom does not mean you're praising a goddess of wisdom. And it doesn't mean that this wisdom is a literal being. It's just wisdom is an abstract quality that happens to be personified. And in the same way, picturing the earth as if it's a woman, which is what happened in this case, is not meant to be taken literally. It doesn't mean it's a deity or things like that. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody worships a deity that's a personification of the world. In fact, there are. In Egyptian mythology, for example, the earth is depicted as a god named Geb, and the sky, his wife, is depicted as a goddess named Nut. And so there are people who would personify the earth and worship it as a deity. The Egyptians did that. They worshipped Geb. And there were some people, and have been some tribal people down in South America, who have worshipped Mother Earth. And of course, they use the name Mother Earth for that. They'd say Pachamama. So there were people who would worship Pachamama as a goddess, but they weren't Catholics. And in fact, the image that they have, which is of Mother Earth as a pregnant woman, symbolizing the fecundity of the earth, its ability to nurture new life, that's not a traditional Pachamama image. This is not something, you didn't have similar images of a pregnant kneeling woman being worshipped by people down in the rainforest. This was something new they came up with for the conference that they had in Rome. And so this is a brand new symbol. It's just a way of personifying the earth that God has given to us and that we need to take care for. And they took this symbol over to Rome for this meeting, and then people, prayed around it and had ceremonies, but they weren't worshiping the image. And just like you can praise wisdom without literally worshiping wisdom as a goddess, you can give thanks to God for Mother Earth and symbolically say thanks for the blessings that are in our lives, because we get to live on earth and we have food and we have this wonderful nature around us that God has created. You can do all of that without thinking something's literally a goddess. And as long as you're not thinking this is a goddess, you're not committing idolatry. So this was very widely misrepresented in certain discontented parts of the Catholic blogosphere, and misrepresented as if it's idolatry, when if you try to understand what actually happened here and how this statuette got made and what it actually represented and what people were actually doing, they were not worshiping as a goddess. These people are Catholics. They know there's only one God. That doesn't mean you can't show respect or reverence for other things, like, for example, the saints, or wisdom or things like that. And so I understand the concern, but I would have to say that this incident was very widely misrepresented by people who ought to know better and who ought to be more charitable than they in fact were. Having said that, I agree the optics of it lent themselves to misunderstanding. And so if they had asked me, should we do this? Should we make this statue and bring it over and put it in an area where people are praying to God and singing songs to God and stuff like that, most of which will not be understood because we don't all speak the same language? I would say, no, you shouldn't do that. That's going to cause some confusion. But it is not actually idolatry.
John, thank you very, very much for that question. It's a while since we've had a Pachamama question, and I appreciate it. Let's go to Dallas, Texas. Binto is listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Binto, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy.
My question is on the way we call Jesus and Mother Mary, the names Jesus and Mary, in English. But if you look at the original, language, or even in many Eastern rites, it's called as, Jesus is called as Yeshu, or Mother Mary is named as Mariam. So I was wondering how that changes happen. For example, if you go to Germany or Japan or anywhere in Africa, your name will still be Jimmy, right? They won't change the name based on the language. So that was my first question as to why the name change happened in languages. Second is, should we go back to, referring Jesus and Mary with their original names, because these names, biblical names, do have a meaning, right?
Okay, so the reason that, first of all, the reason that that these name changes occurred is because names get modified. That happens even within a single language. For example, my legal name is Jimmy. That's what's on my birth certificate. But that doesn't stop some people from referring to me as James. It also doesn't stop some people from referring to me as Jim. So right there, even though my legal name is Jimmy, some people, even in English, call me by other names. The same thing happens when you start crossing languages, because languages either do or don't have equivalents in other languages, and whether or not they have an equivalent in another language, they frequently get modified to sound more natural in the other language. So, for example, in Spanish, you could call me Jaime, or you could call me Diego. And if I'm down in Mexico or somewhere else in the Spanish-speaking world and someone refers to me as Jaime or Diego, I'm not going to have a problem with that. Similarly, if I was in Scotland, my name, or at least one of my names historically, would be Hamish. because Hamish is the Scottish equivalent of James. Similarly, in Ireland, I would be called Seamus, because Seamus is the Irish equivalent of James. And I actually had a friend from Northern Ireland who would refer to me as Seamus. It was just what he called me. In Hebrew, my name would be Yaqub. And so if I went over to Israel, someone a native Hebrew speaker in Israel might refer to me as Yaqub. And if I went over to the Vatican and they wanted to refer to me by my Latin name, it would be Jacobus. And so there are a bunch of variations right there on my name, Jimmy. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't think that people must call me Jimmy. If they call me James, I'll often correct them because that's actually not my legal name. But I would let all the others slide. You know, I actually kind of like it if my Irish friend calls me Seamus, for example. And Jim is so close to Jimmy, I generally don't bother insisting on the extra syllable. So actually, I got a lot of variations on my name, and the same is true of names like Jesus and Mary. Now, we get the name Jesus from the Greek Jesus, which is what his name is in Greek. And that's what's in the Greek New Testament. Similarly, Maria and Mariam are both just variations on Mary, and they both appear in the Greek New Testament. So if you want to call Jesus and Mary by their names in the New Testament, it's Jesus and either Maria or Mariam. But we know that they weren't native Greek speakers. They may have spoken Greek, but they were natively Aramaic speakers, and so their names would have been a little different, particularly Jesus's. But then you've got a question of, so if we wanted to call Jesus by his Aramaic name, which version of Aramaic are you going to use? Because it's kind of like in English with Jim and Jimmy. They're not identical names. Jamie is another variation that's in English. They're not identical names, but they're used by different groups of English speakers. So different Aramaic speakers have different names for Jesus too. It is often conjectured that his Aramaic name would be pronounced Yeshua, but there are other dialects of Aramaic where the name Jesus is pronounced Yeshua. And so even in Aramaic, Jesus could be called different things depending on which dialect of Aramaic you're speaking. And while, yes, names do have meanings, and that's why the New Testament points out that Jesus has the name he has because he's going to save his people from his sins. Yeshua means something like God saves or Yahweh saves. That doesn't mean you got to use the name in its pristine form. It was not used in its pristine form even in Jesus's own day. And I think we have proof of the fact that Jesus and Mary don't really care about us using the pristine forms of their names because the inspired New Testament doesn't use them. Jesus, like I said, he gets called Jesus in the New Testament and not Yeshua or Yeshua or things like that. So he and his Holy Spirit inspired the New Testament to use this Greek version, and that shows that he's not really hung up about us calling him by the exact Aramaic name, the exact way it was pronounced in his hometown Aramaic dialect. So I don't think we need to sweat this one.
Pinto, thank you very, very much. I'm going to keep moving, try to get as many on with Jimmy as I can. Ken's in Texas, listening on 106.9 FM. Ken, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Howdy and hello. Hey, I got questions about, like, the crosses on the side of the road where people have died. What's the Catholic view on that? Can we pray in front of them just like we do in the cemetery? I know if we pray at the cemetery, there's an indulgence or two associated with that. Is there a same indulgence if we pray at a cross of someplace that died? Can Catholics put the cross at a place?
I'm going to need to start answering these questions because we're about to hit the break. The Catholic Church does not have a teaching about roadside crosses. However, there doesn't seem to be anything objectionable in principle. So if you want to put up a memorial for a relative who died in, say, a traffic accident by the site where they died on the road, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. Can you pray at them? Well, I do. When I drive past them, I'll say, Lord, help this person, but if you want to stop and pray, you can. Just be sure you park safely so that you don't get hit by a passing car. There's nothing wrong with praying for people. You can do it in any location, including at a site of a monument commemorating their memory. Is there an indulgence for praying at roadside crosses? That's one I don't know the answer to. I'm pretty sure there's not a specific indulgence for that. But I'd have to look in the Enchiridion or Handbook of Indulgences to see what kind of indulgence is available for this. I would guess there's probably one for praying for someone, for the soul of someone, regardless of where you're located. But I'd have to check specifically to see the wording and whether it would apply to a roadside cross monument.
And that brings us to the break. Thanks, Ken, very much for the question. We'll take a quick break, right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, a little bit of groovy music. Jimmy Akin here. Next hour, Mark Brumley will be here. And it's open forum. You can call and ask whatever you like. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. We go right to Janet, who's in Maryland, listening on 1160 AM. Janet, welcome. Go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Jimmy, and good evening, Asai.
Good evening, Janet.
My question to you is, I was in conversation. I have a very good non-denominational Christian friend, and I'm a cradle Catholic. And as we were talking, their belief is that Our Lady, our Blessed Mother, realized the divinity and started following Jesus at the very end, at the time of his death, just at the very end. Which kind of left me dumbfounded, and I kind of was taken aback, being a cradle Catholic, because I know that's not true. As an apologetic, how would you answer that? Because I know Our Lady was submissive in her fiat in Luke 1. But how would you answer that to someone that's non-Catholic and the belief is completely opposite of what we believe.
Okay, Janet.
Okay, so Janet, let me ask you a question. What are you asking exactly? Are you asking about when did Mary consent to become the mother of the Messiah, or when did Mary consent to having a son who would cause her suffering, like through his death on the cross? Or are you asking specifically the question, when did Mary realize that Jesus was God?
No, my non-denominational friend realizes that the Blessed Mother realized his divinity only at the time of his death.
No, I understand that. I'm asking, what are you asking? What is your question?
My question is, how would I answer that?
Okay.
How would I? I was kind of trying to, talk to her about it. And how would you, as apologetic, how would you, what advice would you give me, and how I could answer that question?
Well, you said that we Catholics don't believe that Mary only realized that Jesus was divine towards the end of his life. I would ask, how do you know that? What would you appeal to show that Catholics need to believe that? Because let me simplify it for you, because I can make a counter case. Now, when Gabriel shows up and tells Mary that she's going to be the mother of the Messiah, he says, therefore, the child that will be born to you will be called the Son of God. So, okay, Mary knows from before conception that Jesus is going to be the Son of God. The difficulty is the term Son of God can mean multiple different things. It can refer to what we mean today, which is he's the second person of the divine Trinity. It can, but that was a new meaning. That was not something Jewish people were expecting. They didn't have a clear understanding that there is a Son of God in that sense. There were some indications that some Jews understood there to be some kind of plurality in the Godhead. So like there's maybe more than one person there, but they didn't have a revelation of the second person is regarded as the son of the first person, who is the Father. So they didn't have a clear understanding of that point. They did have another tradition, which was to refer to certain high-ranking angels as sons of God. And that's a usage that's found in various passages in the Old Testament. They also had a tradition of regarding the king as the Son of God. So like we read in the Psalms, you are my son, today I have begotten you, where God is addressing the king of Israel. They also had a recognition of Adam as the Son of God, because if you look at Luke's genealogy in Luke chapter 3, Luke traces Jesus's genealogy all the way back to Adam, and then he says, and Adam was the Son of God. So there's a sense in which Adam is the Son of God, even though he's not the second person of the Trinity. They also had the idea that righteous people are sons of God. And so they had multiple different understandings of what the phrase Son of God meant, none of which were our modern clear understanding of second person of the divine Trinity, who is eternally begotten by the first person of the divine Trinity. So that was a new usage. So if you put yourself in Mary's position and say, how do you understand this statement that she's going to give birth to the Messiah and he's going to be called the Son of God? Well, he could be called a Son of God in several of those senses. In particular, since the Messiah is the rightful king of Israel as the successor to the line of David, he could be the Son of God in the same sense that the Israelite kings were, and that wouldn't imply he was a divine person in the same way. So that actually would be more likely how Mary might understand it. And we seem to have confirmation that Mary did not initially understand the full reality of the kind of Son of God that Jesus was, because if in Luke, at the end of Luke chapter 2, Jesus is 12 years old. He's been left in the temple. They go to find him. And when they finally discover him in the temple, Mary says, why have you done this? Because your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. And Jesus's reply is, did you not know that I would need to be in my Father's house? And so he's implying, well, look, I'm the Son of God in such a unique sense that I'm going to go to the temple and I'm going to be in my Father's house, and that's where you should have started looking for me. But she obviously didn't understand that. Otherwise, they would have started by looking for Jesus in the temple. So it seems that Mary, even when Jesus is 12 years old, does not have a clear understanding of the full reality of what it means for him to be the Son of God. She understands he's the Son of God in some sense, but it doesn't seem clear. She doesn't seem to be fully clear on exactly what sense he's the Son of God in. She hasn't locked in on the full modern understanding yet. And that would suggest that she came to this understanding sometime after Jesus was 12 years old. But when? Well, we don't have anything in the Gospels that would identify that moment precisely for us. And in fact, in the Gospels, there's some contention between Jesus and his family, including Mary, where it seems they don't fully understand his mission. That happens in all three of the synoptic gospels, for example, and it's mentioned that Mary is one of the family members who comes to talk to him about his mission, which they don't fully understand. So I would say if someone told me it was only at the end of Jesus's life that Mary had a full understanding of who he was, I'd say, well, okay, that's an interesting proposal. Maybe you're right, and maybe you're not. I would like to know how you know it was just at that last moment rather than earlier, because I could see it being earlier than that. But I also can't rule out, based on the biblical data, that it was late in the game when she came to a final, full understanding of exactly what his sonship means. So that's how I'd approach the question. And so regardless of whether one says, oh, she knew early, or no, she didn't know until the last minute, I would say, well, what's your basis for this view? Because I'm not aware of any teaching of the Catholic Church that says Mary had to understand all this early. In fact, the Second Vatican Council document Lumen Gentium acknowledges that there were things that Mary did not initially understand about Jesus and that she grew into an understanding of. And so I don't think we have a church teaching on exactly when she understood this point. And I would say, based on the data, one could hold a variety of different positions.
Janet, I wonder, how does that all sit with you?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. I wanted to ask Jimmy, as a beginner apologetic, it's very interesting to me. What does he suggest I should read and, or resources that I could have?
Okay.
Okay.
Those questions are...
Yeah. So I have two basic suggestions. The first one is go to schoolofapologetics.com, and that's our online Catholic School of Apologetics. And you might want to check out a course that I taught called Beginning Apologetics. And you can watch it online. It's just short segments. You can watch it at your own pace. And so I'd suggest that. I'd also suggest you get a copy of my book, A Daily Defense, which goes through more than 300 different defenses of the Catholic faith and the Christian faith more broadly, and faith in general, even more broadly than that. And since you're here in the United States, Janet, let's see if you can hang on the line, and we'll send you a copy of A Daily Defense.
Janet, we're going to go to a break, so please do hang on the line. Edgar will get to you, and if you'd like a copy of A Daily Defense, all you got to do is give us an address, and we'll send it off. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
EWTN's religious catalog has great summer reading for kids. ABC Get to Know the Saints with Me introduces young readers to the communion of saints in a simple and memorable way. Each page includes an easy-to-read letter of the alphabet and a charming rhyme about the life of the corresponding saint in heaven. For more, visit EWTNRC.com today.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Mark Brumley, president of Ignatius Press, will be here next hour. So any call is welcome for Mark, but maybe you've got a question about the Ignatius Study Bible. Every time he's on, people ask me about the Ignatius Study Bible. So you can call him and ask him that if you'd like.
Good. They need to pester him about that.
That's what everybody says. Will you pester Mark about this? And I have neglected to pester, so today I'm going to pester Mark. I hope he's ready for it. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour, the number 888-31-TRUTH. Off we go to New York, where Kevin is listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Kevin, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
I hope you're doing fine. So I was wondering, what is the official, Council of Trent or Catholic view of total depravity? Because I'd say in a sense, we reject, Calvinism. But, I've heard my friend who's a Thomist say that God always makes the first move, and repentance is in itself a grace from God, which sounds like total depravity, that we cannot choose God, without him first calling us.
So the answer is going to depend on, total depravity is a doctrine that's discussed in Calvinism, and it's understood different ways. Based on the name total depravity, it makes it sound like humans are as depraved as possible. They're just totally depraved. And that makes it sound like they're as sinful as possible. So like every single minute you're alive, you're mortally sinning in the worst way. And based on the name total depravity, that's how some folks in Calvinism understand it, that like we're constantly mortally sinning every single moment. And we're all just as bad as Hitler. You break the law at all, you're just as bad as Hitler. There are people who have that view, but they tend to be lay people. They tend not to be Calvinist theologians. Calvinist theologians tend to have a more refined view of what total depravity means, and some of them prefer alternative terminology, even though total depravity is the term that's been used historically in English. At least many of them recognize this is a misleading term. It misleads people into thinking something much worse than is actually the case. And so, for example, one of the alternative proposals to total depravity is total inability. And total inability is understood as total inability to turn to God without his grace. And so this is then the idea that in order to turn to God and repent, we need God's grace. God must take the initiative and give us his grace first to make that conversion possible. We can't do it by ourselves without grace. And if that's what you mean, if you mean totally unable to come to God without his grace, Catholics would agree with that. That, in fact, that's actual Catholic teaching. So if that's what you mean by total depravity, Catholics would be right there with you. But the term total depravity is kind of misleading. If you'd like to read more about this, I wrote a paper a number of years ago exploring how close one could get to Calvinism without violating Catholic teaching. I've always meant to write a counter paper of how far away you could get from Calvinism, without violating Catholic teaching, but I haven't done that. I need to do that at some point to balance it. But if you want to read this paper, it's on my website, jimmyakin.com. It's called A Tiptoe Through Tulip, T-U-L-I-P, the famous Calvinistic acronym for their 5 distinctive doctrines. So look up A Tiptoe Through Tulip by Jimmy Akin.
And thank you very, very much, Kevin, for the call. Appreciate it. I'm going to keep moving, try to get on as many as I can with Jimmy. And up next is Eva in Phoenix, watching on YouTube. Eva, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, Jimmy. Hello, everybody. I'm actually calling on behalf of my cousin who's in the UK, and she's unable to call into the line.
That's okay.
So,
what's your question?
Okay. Thank you. Her question is, as a Catholic, is it okay to do yoga for circulation but not as a spiritual path?
Yeah, well, if you're just assuming yoga postures, they're like any other postures you might assume. Postures do not have intrinsic meaning. They only have the meanings we give to them. Like, for example, and this is one reason why some gestures are offensive in some cultures, but not others, because the local people give different meanings to them. And in some cultures, a friendly gesture gets interpreted in an unfriendly way, and vice versa. Well, the same is true not just of what we do with our hands or our tongues, because that's where speech comes from. We put our mouth in different postures to make words, and they get understood differently in different cultures. Well, the same thing is true of our overall body. And so bodily postures don't have an intrinsic meaning. If you're not layering on a spiritual meaning, then you're just doing an exercise. And as long as you're doing an exercise, whether they call it yoga or something else, and you're not attributing any religious significance to this, and you're not endorsing any false teachings by doing this, and yeah, you can stimulate your circulation with this or any other exercise regimen that will work for you.
Thank you so much.
Eva, thanks.
No problem.
Thanks very much. If your cousin or anybody, go ahead.
And I would also say that you'll hear some folks claim that the contrary to that, but invariably, or almost invariably, I should say, they're being superstitious, and they're attributing more significance to postures than the postures really have. And that's the definition of superstition, is believing too much about something. Like, you believe that these postures have too much meaning compared to the meaning they really have.
Again, Eva, thanks very, very much. Let's go to Catherine in Victoria, Texas, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Catherine, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, this is in light of the whole with Mary not knowing fully about Jesus being God. Mm-hmm. I just want to know what your thoughts are, because I'd heard this in a Credible Witness class also. What about how she conceived? That didn't tell her.
Well, she knew God. She knew that God was going to do a miracle and cause her to have a child. So she knew that. But there have been other miraculous births. Now, there weren't virgin births, but there were other miraculous births in the Old Testament, and God certainly can cause a miraculous birth even without a human father. And that does at least contain, the hint that because there's no human father, it means God is the father. But still, that doesn't tell you in what sense is Jesus the Son of God. God could, to underscore the fact that, let's say God just wanted a righteous man born. Well, God could miraculously cause a woman to become pregnant without a human father as a way of saying, this is my son. And all he might mean by that is, this is a righteous man. Or if he wants to give birth to have the son be a king, it's like, okay, this is my son, and that means this is a king of Israel. Or, as it turned out, he wants us to understand, this is the second person of the Trinity that I begot eternally, and that's what he meant. And that's, in fact, what Gabriel did mean. The question, though, is not what did Gabriel mean. The question is, what would Mary have understood at this time? And since this was a new and unprecedented use of the phrase Son of God, Mary probably wouldn't have understood it in its full sense at that time. She likely would have understood it in a more narrow sense. And we seem to have evidence, as I covered, for that, because she doesn't seem to fully understand who Jesus is when he's 12 years old, and possibly even later. So I think that, the virgin birth is significant, but I don't think it proves that Mary understood the fullness of who Jesus was when it occurred.
Catherine, thank you very, very much for that follow-up question. I am going to continue moving because lines continue full. Michael's in New York, listening also on the Catholic Answers Live app. Michael, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Okay, so apart from the Gospel of John, which Jesus clearly equates himself with God the Father and God himself, do we have conclusive evidence that in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus really believed himself to be God?
Yes, I think we do. One of the famous passages that's sometimes cited in this connection in the Synoptic Gospels is where Jesus says that no one knows the Father except the Son, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son and those to whom the Son reveals him. And that suggests an extraordinarily close relationship that is unique between Jesus and the Father. We also have passages in the Synoptic Gospels indicating Jesus's pre-existence, where he talks about having descended from heaven, and that would indicate he previously was in heaven. And then one of the passages I'd point to, and I'll have to be quick about this, I can't explain it fully right now, but there was some awareness in Second Temple era Judaism that there might be some kind of plurality in the Godhead. And this was known is known in modern scholarship as the two powers in heaven doctrine. That, okay, there's God up there, that's Yahweh, but then there's also this kind of second Yahweh figure who was also identified as the Son of Man. And when Jesus is asked directly in Mark's gospel, for example, by Caiaphas, the high priest, tell us, plainly, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus says yes, and from now on, you're going to see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And that's a reference to Daniel's vision, where Daniel sees God in heaven, seated on a throne, and then a cloud comes before him carrying a figure like a Son of Man. This is the apocalyptic figure. It's the second Yahweh figure in the two powers in heaven doctrine. And so by saying from now on you're going to see this, what Jesus is saying is, I'm that guy. I'm the second Yahweh. I'm the second power in heaven. I'm the one in Daniel's vision. I'm the Son of Man. And so I think we do have clear evidence in the Synoptic Gospels that Jesus understood himself to be divine.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much for the call and for the question. We'll go to Ohio. Jill's in Ohio listening on Annunciation Radio. Jill, glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Happy to.
I just heard, well, thank you. Just heard this morning on Catechism in a Year, Father Mike Schmitz was defining marriage, and he said it's one baptized man and one baptized woman. And I believe he's going to cover tomorrow what happens if you're Catholic and you marry a non-baptized.
Jill, just so you know, we're getting really close to the end of the hour. I need you to ask your question so I can give you a good answer.
Sure thing. So my question is, my husband was not baptized when we were married. Do we need to do, since then he has been baptized and converted to Catholicism.
Okay.
Gotcha, Jill.
So, Jill, at the time, assuming y'all got married in the church, assuming you were Catholic, you did not need to do anything. If you got married in the church, it would be a valid marriage, but it would be a natural marriage, not a sacramental marriage. When your husband then got baptized, any marriage between two baptized persons is sacramental. And so when your husband got baptized, your marriage automatically elevated to become a sacramental marriage. As a result, you don't need to do anything, and you should all be fine. The marriage was initially natural, but is now sacramental.
Okay, Jill, we just got a few seconds. Does that all make sense?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you very, very much for the call. I'll tell you what, if you want to hang on, we'll send you a copy of Jimmy's book, A Daily Defense, because we do appreciate that call. And Jimmy, thank you very, very much for those last 2 hours.
No problem. Last hour. And,
that's right.
Have fun in the second hour with Mark Brumley. I know you always say Ignatius Press is the best publisher, Catholic publisher in the Alpha Quadrant, but if you ever look at Star Trek maps, the Alpha Quadrant is set up stupid, because what they do is they draw a line between the center of the galaxy and the center of our sun that divides the Alpha and Beta quadrants, and that would mean Earth is in the Alpha Quadrant for 6 months and in the Beta Quadrant for 6 months, and that's a stupid mapping system. But have fun in the Alpha Quadrant nonetheless.
Jimmy, I always learn from you, and it's always these unexpected things. I had no idea about that ridiculous mapping system. That makes no sense at all. All right, I'm going to share that with Mark Brumley and see if he's got a retort. Thanks, Jimmy.
Have fun.
Coming up, more open forum. There's 2 lines open right now. There'll be another one as soon as we get Jill her book. And if you have a question, you are very, very welcome. You don't have to be Catholic to call. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, the number is 888-318-7884. Right back with Mark after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Mark Brumley is our guest. I got to share the bad news with him that he spends half his time outside the Alpha Quadrant. I bet he didn't even know it. I always introduce him as Mark Brumley, president of Ignatius Press, the most important publisher in the Alpha Quadrant. But now I've just learned today that he spends half of his time in the Beta Quadrant. Hello, Mark Brumley.
More than half, probably. I'm doing missionary work, man.
Oh, no, Jimmy told me that the Alpha Quadrant and the Beta Quadrant, the line that separates them is the middle of our sun, which means we spend half the year in the Beta Quadrant. I never knew that.
I'm often there.
Well, I know you are because the whole Earth is there. You've never left Earth. I know.
Oh, you say I've never left Earth. How do you know that?
I have my suspicions. I don't think you have access to.
I spend the half of the year that Earth is in the Beta Quadrant. I actually spend it in the Gamma Quadrant.
Now I don't even know where that is. Like I don't even know where
it's on the other side of the Beta Quadrant.
So how many quadrants do we have? I guess 4, right? You would
Alpha,
probably
Beta, Gamma,
you shoot
Delta.
for 4 quadrants.
Yeah, man.
All right, Alpha, Beta, Gamma. All right. Well, I'm glad you're here with us now in the Alpha Quadrant.
Yes, I too.
I appreciate it.
And you know what else is here in the Alpha Quadrant?
What?
This book.
What book? Let me
which
see.
We talked a little bit
Benedict.
about last.
Oh, what is Christianity? Yeah.
We talked about that last time.
I haven't gotten. You need to tell your publicist. I have not gotten a copy of that. So.
Well, I will let them know.
Yeah,
this is
because we want to interview the author.
The last writings of Benedict XVI, man. And okay, I come on here and I can hawk books and all that sort of stuff, but I read this, when we had it translated and it was a manuscript. I didn't need to read it for the purposes of deciding whether or not to do it because we'd already done that. But I just was reading through it and I think, okay, this is really good. So now we have it published as a book. As often happens, when I read it as a manuscript, I like it. But when I read it as a book, published book,
yeah,
it's awesome. And this is just an incredible book. I mean,
I'm happy
right out of the gate, world religions and the Christian faith. And that's chapter 1, and it's broken down into 2 things, 2 little essays or topics or subdivisions or whatever you call it. One is what is religion? That's the second one. But the first one spells it out in a sentence or in a phrase. Love at the origin of missionary work.
Wow.
Missionary work is not about trying to dominate people or make them think the way we do because it's the way we think.
Right.
It is expressing God's love for them. And so that's where it originates. So that means if we're engaged in missionary work, whether that's missionary work in a non-Christian land, a former Christian land, or in a place which is predominantly Christian, any kind of work we do to try to bring people to Christ, which is evangelization, must have at it as its origin love. So that means anything that we do in that process that's inconsistent with love is wrong.
Yep.
So nowadays, there's this dispute about evangelization versus proselytizing. Proselytizing, the older use of the word didn't necessarily connote doing something bad. It just meant trying to make converts. And nowadays, we want to make a distinction between those activities aimed at bringing people to Christ that are consistent with love, and we call those evangelization, and those activities that may be aimed at converting someone or bringing someone to Christ, but they're engaged in an appropriate way, which is inconsistent with love, and we call that proselytizing. But whether you like that terminological distinction or not, the reality is that there are ways in which we ought to evangelize, and the motive behind that should be love. And there are things that we can do that even if we say, oh, I'm about bringing people to Christ, but if I'm in doing these things that are contrary to love, then I'm not really evangelizing. So anyway, it's right there in the very first chapter of this book.
What is Christianity? The last writings of Pope Benedict XVI. We're not going to be able to do an author interview about it, obviously, but
he's busy.
He is busy, and he's also at rest at the same time.
Right.
Both.
Amazing.
Isn't heaven great? Mark, I love you. I love it when you're on this show. I think you're a magnificent, wonderful Christian man. And so you will have to forgive me if what comes next is offends you in any way.
Okay.
But every time you're on, I get the emails.
Yes.
And they say, when is the Ignatius Study Bible going to be out? And I am now getting threats from people. And they're saying, if you don't ask Mark about this, and then the threats are nothing. They're like, it's going to hurt my feelings.
Here's what I'll tell you. We've got all the books written, and they're laid out more or less. There's some tweaking going on and here and there in terms of layout to put them all together in one book. But we have, 5 or 6 essays that have been added that make it, sort of rounded out as a whole Bible. And those are at the Archdiocesan Censor for the Archdiocese of San Francisco.
Give me a name so I can have people call that person.
Yeah, so if you want to pray that she's able to, and anybody else she's got working on this, is able to get these things done sooner.
Yeah.
That's really the main, there's a lot that goes into putting all these books together into a single book. So I don't want to boil it down to just it's all the censor's fault. But we can't, there's like stuff that we can't do until those get approved.
You're getting your ducks in a row.
So
all right.
We're hoping early in 2020, this is 2023, 2024, that we'll be able to do that.
But
it
making
depends
news
on when these things get
depending
approved.
on the censor. Because
and
Margie,
she's working hard. She's like got a real life, She doesn't sit around twiddling her thumbs.
Just this week, I got an email from Margie, and as soon as it's ready, she's buying 6 copies. She's getting one for herself and one for each of her kids. So
excellent.
So
you've
already sold 6 copies of this,
right
basically.
Right there. Yeah, that's right.
All
but
right.
meanwhile, we're still going to publish even when we have the complete Bible, we're still going to publish the fascicles, as the fancy professorial types call them. I call them booklets. We're still going to publish those because lots of people use them in group Bible studies and things of that sort. So
does that mean like each gospel will? I think you already do that.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're going to continue to do that. That's my point. We're going to continue to do that in addition to having the whole thing.
I love having each of the gospels as a book.
Yeah.
I love that. It's so much easier to read it that way. But
and there are lots of things we've got in the plans and in the works when this is all done that's really going to be great. And I know we got callers we have to go to, but I do have to praise, Scott Hahn and Curtis Mitch, who for many, many, many years worked very hard on this. And, things were looking really good. Then we had COVID and all kinds of problems that slowed everything down. But we're finally back, and
okay, good.
God's will be done.
Well,
we'll get the.
I think I can go back to being friends with Margie now, too.
Very good.
So because I've asked you. All right, let's do a question. All right.
Yes, let's do that.
All right. Lisa's in Pennsylvania watching on Facebook. We're glad you're here, Lisa. Go ahead with your question for Mark.
Hi. I have a friend that converted 30 years ago, and she is now constantly in my ear saying that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, and I send her literature that proves it's not.
What did she convert to 30 years ago?
She's an evangelist.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, not to the Catholic faith. Okay, gotcha. So she says the church is the whore of Babylon.
Yes, and I send her, I Google it, and I send her the information proving that it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know that this is a question that the Catholic Church has dealt with from Protestants for a long time. So I just wanted to talk to you about it and get your take on it.
So, of course, I don't think the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. And I know that sometimes people who think that it is have some kind of history or issue with the Catholic Church. So I guess my question, Lisa, for you would be, does your friend have any kind of background with the Catholic Church?
She was Catholic, and of course, her parents didn't want her to switch, and now she, her dad's in his 80s, so now she has Bible study at her house that he attends now. But I have done, the research, that there's no way that the Catholic Church could be the Whore of Babylon, as stated in when they talk about the Whore of Babylon in the God,
in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
that the Vatican doesn't sit on 7 mountains.
Right.
Rome does.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's right.
And then I just recently read, I just wanted to get your opinion because I recently read that, the author was saying from John's point of view, who wrote the Book of Revelations, that he was most likely referring to Rome.
It's like, that's probably the majority interpretation. Some people interpret the Whore of Babylon to refer to apostate Judaism, so those folks who rejected Jesus as the Messiah. By the way, let's be clear, we're not saying that all Jews are, or that all Jews are responsible for killing Jesus or anything like that. But obviously in the early centuries or the first century of the church, you had the leadership of Judaism that wasn't Judaism at that point, but we'll just say the covenant people, their leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are rejected, and the temple system rejected Jesus as the Messiah. And so one interpretation of the Whore of Babylon, as you say, some people interpret it as false religious system associated with Rome. Other people interpret it as, and this is a minority view, the apostate leadership of the covenant people of God who rejected Jesus as the Messiah. But in any case, whether it's Rome and a Roman aggregation of false religion and false political power, or those representing those religious leaders who rejected Jesus, it's not the Catholic Church. And that's a matter of history. It's just not the Catholic Church. Now, your friend may say, well, I think it is. And you can say, I think it isn't. We can go back and forth. But there's as much, in fact, you could turn it around and say, well, why shouldn't I think your belief system and those who espouse your belief system aren't part of the Whore of Babylon? So obviously the Whore of Babylon is associated with a false religious system. And why shouldn't your belief systems be the false religious system? Now, of course, she believes her beliefs are biblical, but then so do you. So it's kind of a stalemate as far as that goes, if you're going to go this back and forth quid pro quo. I think the main, what I say when people say the Catholic Church is the Whore of Babylon, I would say certainly there are Catholics who don't live up to the gospel, just as there are Protestants who don't live up to the gospel. And there have been various people in the history of the church who were associated with Christ's church. You can go look in the letter to the Galatians or read 1 Corinthians. Those people are clearly part of the church of Jesus Christ, and yet they fall into gross sin and they do terrible things. And in the book of Revelation, the 7 churches that are addressed in the book of Revelation, 7 local churches and congregations in the book of Revelation, they're all obviously part of the church, and yet nevertheless there are people in those churches who are unfaithful to Jesus Christ, and in fact Jesus talks about how he's going to come and do all these terrible things to them if they don't repent. So that's true of all of Christianity. All Christians have that. And if you want to think about that as part of the same spirit or outlook or attitude that was manifest in the Whore of Babylon, in the book of Revelation, you can do that, because this is the same spirit, which is a spirit that rejects Jesus Christ. And so that would be true of Catholics and non-Catholic Christians who are disobedient to Jesus Christ. But there's nothing peculiar about the Catholic Church that would make the Catholic Church the Whore of Babylon.
All right. Does that all make sense to you?
Yes. And then when I say to her that the Catholic Church was the first, that Jesus made the Catholic Church, it was the first church that was a Christian church, she says, oh no, no, and she like raises her voice and says, "That's not true." And
Well, okay.
That's not an argument.
You could refute that with by raising your voice and saying it is true.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'll send you a book we've got. It's called "The Early Church Was the Catholic Church," and you can read it, and it might give you some stuff. Conversation might be helpful in this regard, and maybe this will give you material for that conversation. So if you just hang on, we'll get an address there in Pennsylvania, and we'll send you off. The early church was the Catholic Church, but we got to take a quick break. Right back with more Open Forum with Mark Brumley on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I don't like looking back. I prefer to look forward and keep moving forward. There's plenty to cover. I do a lot of research and try to dig out the bits and pieces of a life or of an agenda that people don't want to talk about.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Mark Brumley is our guest. Mark, of course, the president of Ignatius Press. And you should get to know Ignatius Press. They're at ignatius.com. And all kinds of great things, including Mark was mentioning the new book and I was going to say the last book, but we don't know that. There might be some that we don't know about yet. But the last writings of Pope Benedict XVI are now out in a beautiful book called "What is Christianity?" And if you can answer that question, you are well on your way.
By the way, before you go to the next caller, I have to compliment you on how you encourage conversation as opposed to what I said, which is like, well, when your friend raises her voice and you raise your voice back, right? That's a great apologetical technique.
Actually, well, you started out by talking about love and how all the basis of all of this is love. And you are one of the most Irenic people on here. You don't look for fights at all. So I was what? I take offense at that. So if that sounded like I was in any way referring to you, that's not the case.
No, but
just
you were right.
Yeah,
you were right.
Oh, it was. All right. Well,
we need to dialogue and converse, and sometimes people raise their voice, and the response shouldn't be, but being human beings, it often is. We raise our voices to counter.
Yeah. Right.
And I think we should try to lower our voices and be good witnesses. You got it?
Finally, it got through my thick skull. Thank you, Mark. Let's go to Greg in Fort Worth, Texas, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Greg, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Mark Brumley.
Thank you for taking it. So I've been looking at rosaries and came across one with a pardon crucifix on it and read how an indulgence is granted for devoutly praying with that specific rosary. And so the question is, how can an indulgence be specific to a design of a crucifix where you can gain indulgence by praying one type of rosary but not another?
Yeah, I think the idea behind the indulgence and attaching it to a particular object or type of object is to encourage the use of that object in the way it's intended. So obviously in the so-called pardon crucifix or any particular, a rosary or something like that has an indulgence attached to it, like an apostolic rosary or things of that sort. The idea is that you encourage the use of that in a particular prayerful way or meditative way, and that's the idea of the indulgence. Of course, we remember that an indulgence is a partial or complete remission of the temporal punishment due particular sins and activities that the Church, with her authority, can associate with that power to transform us interiorly, which is really what the removal of temporal punishment, that language, the idea that there's still something that I need to undergo to right myself in relation to some sin I did and in my relationship to God. So, yeah, it's just a matter of the church trying to encourage the use of particular things or particular prayers or particular activities that the church sees as especially helpful in some particular respect. Well, that's the idea behind it.
Okay, Greg?
That makes
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Perfect is a high score, Mark. Good job.
Well, I hang out with you and it rubs off, you know.
It's starting to. It's starting to. Rudy's in San Antonio. We're going all over Texas today. We're in San Antonio, Texas, listening on the iHeartRadio app. We're happy you're here. Rudy, go ahead with your question.
Yes, good afternoon. I was calling because it seems to me ironic that, when Protestants say that Catholics kind of have a works-based salvation, works system, and then yet they're told, if you pray the sinner's prayer, then you will receive Jesus into your heart and you will be saved. It seems to me ironic that they have to do something to receive that salvation. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, Rudy. Yeah, so I understand your point. What I would say is, first of all, not all Protestants would see it that way. That would say it reduce it down to saying the so-called sinner's prayer. But even those who do emphasize that would not think there's something sort of magical about the activity of saying that specific prayer. What they would say is that there is an action of believing what God has said to us and done for us through Jesus Christ, so that they would see this as an act of faith. Now, I think your instinct is right that sometimes some Protestants juxtapose faith and works, and by works they mean sort of self-justifying works, and that's a false dichotomy. Faith is a kind of activity, so in that sense you could think of it as a work, not a self-justifying work, but an action that we engage in. We believe what God has told us, so there's a kind of acting quality to it. And most Protestants who are sophisticated would say, yeah, that's true, but they would say, well, but that's God's work in us to move us to believe, so that when someone says a sinner's prayer, God is moving that person interiorly and giving that person the gift of faith, so that that person can in turn commit himself to God through faith in Jesus Christ by the work of the Holy Spirit. And I'd say, yeah, that's true. But we Catholics would come in and say, yes, but that same God who is at work in that act of believing is also at work in us when we engage in acts of trusting him. We use the word hope for that. And in acts of loving him, and we use the word charity for that. And just as the activity of faith involves God's grace, and that doesn't, the fact that it's an activity doesn't make it something that we do on our own apart from God, so too the activity of trusting in God in hope and the activity of beginning to love God in charity, those things are also not things that we do of ourselves, but are the work of God's grace in and through us. And so there is no need to posit this radical opposition between faith on the one hand and things like hope and love on the other hand, and seeing those other things as somehow works of the law in the Old Testament. That's not how the New Testament understands salvation. The New Testament sees faith and hope and love as being bound up together in the proper grace-enabled, grace-inspired, grace-completed action of living faith in Jesus Christ. So I think you're onto something. We want to be fair to those Protestants who affirm the sinner's prayer. But I think you're onto something in that there is a tendency on the part of some people to treat something like the sinner's prayer, as something that needs to be done. And they're right about that. It is something that needs to be done, but they wrongly suppose that that's at odds with the work of grace, when in fact it's just a manifestation, one particular form that the work of grace takes. So does that help, Rudy?
Yes, yeah, and I agree with you. Yeah, it just seems ironic that they would put so much emphasis on it. And
yeah.
Well, all right, Rudy, the music's playing, so I got to go. But thank you. I'm glad we had that conversation. Thank you for the call. We'll continue. Some lines open, 888-318-7884. This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest Scott Hahn and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Our guest is Mark Brumley, and you're welcome to call with any question you've got, 888-318-7884. But what I wanted to tell you about Mark is, you may have noticed he's got a little bit of a throat issue today, and so he's not actually eating a hamburger while he's doing the show. It's a lozenge. And, like a lot of people our age, Mark spent just one evening screaming at a Taylor Swift concert, and now it's gone. Right. And you just can't do that anymore, Mark. It's not like when we were young. You got to just sit quietly and let Taylor Swift do her songs and let the kids scream.
I'm learning that now. It's taken me a while, but I'm getting adjusted, So.
My wife was saying the other day, this is crazy in Southern California because Taylor Swift did 6 or 8 nights at SoFi Stadium. I don't think there's anybody else in the world that could do that. I think she's the only person in the world that could fill that stadium 6 or 8 nights in a row. And there's just tons. Everywhere you go, there's people who've been to the Taylor Swift experience. Like they're everywhere. Southern California is overwhelmed with Taylor Swift right now.
That's amazing. Wow. So did you go there and evangelize?
I did not. I didn't know. Like always, I didn't know about it till it was over. Until she had done all 8 nights, and then someone was like, "Man, that Taylor Swift was amazing." And
so you get a little track. You think Taylor Swift is amazing? Let me tell you who is really Swift. Yeah. That's our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, because He came and died for our sins.
Look at you. You should have been outside that stadium. That I should also tell people, I'm only joking. Your voice is not it was not damaged because you were screaming at a Taylor Swift concert. Although if you were there, you know you would. But you probably don't even know a single name of any of her songs. I'll bet you don't know one.
I can't remember now. I used to.
Oh, did you?
Not that I was ever a big Taylor Swift fan, but my kids were, and I was kind of aware. But now I'm getting old, and even what I was aware of, I've forgotten. Things that I know disrespect to Taylor Swift intended, but things that I value even more
than
the title of Taylor Swift songs, I come to forget. So you can bet that these other things just off the radar, man.
Well, I don't know a lot about anything having to do with pop music, but I do feel like if you're going to have somebody be the biggest star in the world, you could do a lot worse than Taylor Swift. She seems like she's not, We did a lot worse in the 70s when we were kids. I think they were all worse than Taylor Swift.
I was a kid in the 90s. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, come on. Yeah.
Man, what are you talking about?
You never hear about Taylor Swift. She bit the head off a bat at a concert. You know that? You never hear that. All right, let's go to Terry.
Thankfully.
Terry. I don't mean to pick on Ozzy Osbourne. But
no, you don't.
I kind of do mean to pick on Ozzy Osbourne. Terry in Illinois. Go ahead.
I just say, hasn't Ozzy kind of cleaned up his act and all that? At least that's what I would.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be picking on him if he was still dangerous. The only reason I'm picking on him is he's like, I feel like I could outrun him now. Terry in Illinois, watching on YouTube. Thanks for waiting, Terry. Go ahead with your question for Mark.
Hi there. How are you? Just to let you know, I actually saw Black Sabbath in the 70s.
I thought you were going to say Taylor Swift, and then you went with Black Sabbath.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
and how was the Black Sabbath performance?
Well,
You don't remember it, do you, Terry? You don't remember it. You're like, I think it was good.
Those days. No, I was into all that kind of stuff back in the day. But,
hey, I was doing Jesus rock and roll back then.
Were you?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well,
Terry doesn't think that's awesome. She said that's awesome, but I could tell by the way she said it. She doesn't think it's that awesome, Mark.
Well, we each have our own thing, right?
There you go, Terry. All right.
I am a longtime Protestant that starts RCIA next month.
Praise God, Terry.
So, and it's really incognito because I also work at my church. So it's kind of a tricky thing. And I know that once it gets out, there are going to be a lot of hard meetings with the staff, with the pastors and so forth. And I'm reading tons. And I've just been for all of the literature that's out there in the YouTube channels, etc.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a question that I know nobody wants to hear or wants to bring up, because and that is about the hard issue of abuse in the church.
Sure.
And the question that I have is, what is different now than when it all came out in the 90s? I mean, how can we know that things are safe now? What's different?
Oh, it's a wonderful question, Terry.
Sense?
It makes perfect sense. Mark?
Certainly there's far more visibility and accountability in the issue, and a sense of responsibility for everybody, not just bishops. Of course, bishops were leaders and are leaders, and so therefore they bear a higher degree of responsibility when people who are under their authority misuse their position and abuse children. And bishops, not all bishops. Sometimes you'll hear it will be spoken of as if this was something that every bishop did, But there were bishops who did inadequately respond and try to cover things up and all of that. And that's all come out and has hurt the church's credibility. The mission of the church has been damaged by that. There's far more awareness of that now, both in terms of bishops, the bishop to bishop sort of peer pressure, if you will, and Rome's oversight of this. Not perfect, but things have improved in that in that area, and likewise with respect to priests and with respect to laity's involvement and being aware of this. I'm teaching a course for the Archdiocese of San Francisco Seminary, or it's actually St. Patrick's Seminary, which is in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, to put that a little bit more precisely. And I also do catechetical formation for the Diocese of Santa Rosa. Both those dioceses, I had to go through a process of being vetted, and checking my background. And then I had to do training, online training, to make sure that I understood the seriousness of the problem of abuse. It's not, by the way, it's not unique to churches. So you're not unique to Catholic churches. The evangelical churches, the Protestant churches have suffered from it. Other religions have as well, but we're much more aware of it in the Catholic context, in part because the Catholic Church is the largest single religious institution in the world. But there are other reasons too. And so I had to go through this training to be, I had to be approved, and then I had to be trained to make sure I'm aware of the signs of abuse or potential abuse and abusers in the institution I'm working with. So that kind of thing never happened. I worked many years ago, side knows this, I worked for the Diocese of San Diego for many, many years at a very high level, and we never went through any of that kind of training and things of that sort at the time. And it wasn't because people were sloppy or indifferent. They just didn't realize the extent of the problem. So now they're trying to address it by putting into place procedures and policies to make sure that people are aware of this. And if they see something, they know how to say something. And that applies everywhere from the diocesan bishop to his priests and deacons and lay leadership to ordinary Catholic volunteers in the parish, being both sensitive to the problem and also keeping an eye out for people who may be engaged in abusive behavior. So I'm just going to say there's just a much more serious, taking this seriously and putting in place policies and procedures to minimize the risk of this kind of thing happening again or continuing to happen. So I don't know how does that kind of address your concern there, Terry?
It does. I know that it's in the Protestant church too, but it's been a lot easier to read about Marian doctrine than it has been to read about this.
Right. Yeah.
I guess I just need to feel somewhat reassured so that I can speak with courage and confidence when I know these conversations arise. I personally know no Catholics, so I don't have Catholics to ask.
So your introduction to the Catholic Church has entirely been online?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So my daughter was looking at switching churches, and she started out looking at the Anglican Church, and then she sent me this podcast called The Cordial Catholic, and this young man that interviews people that have converted from Protestant to the Catholic Church, and it just became. Then there are the Catholic Brothers who talk about the first 500 years, the Church Fathers, and I'm an avid reader. I've, read Scott Hahn. I've read, I can't remember them. I have a huge list of books that I've been going through, and I've read 3 books about RCIA, and I've not even started RCIA. So I'm just really wanting to make sure that, I just really want to know everything that I can know, and I know that there are thousands of years of Catholic.
Well, I hate to. You're breaking up just a little bit, Terry, but I think it just sounds like what a blessing for us that you'll be coming into the church, and I think you can be confident. I have to say though, and Mark, I wonder if you share this feeling. My faith in persons has been shattered somewhat over the 20 or more years we've been at this, in that several times I've thought, well, surely this is behind us now. And then you hear again about some bishop and you go, are you kidding me? Like, how did this person not get it? So my faith in the church is not shaken, but certainly my faith in bishops has been, and so I assume we will see more of this. Until the Lord comes.
I think that there's good reason to think now that new cases are going to be handled differently than in the past, and that we're going to see fewer new cases. I think there's good reason to suppose that. I think that there's good reason to suppose we're going to see all kinds of cases in public institutions where kids are involved, schools and things of that sort, because they're going to be getting a level of scrutiny now that they didn't get in the past. None of this, of course, excuses anybody. The fact that the Protestant church down the road has abuse, or the public school down the road has abuse, or this scout group or whatever, none of that makes it okay for there to be abuse in the Catholic Church. That's just it just doesn't.
Right.
But we are seeing people that I think are genuinely repentant, and they're doing things that they should have done a long time ago to address the problem and to minimize the risk of abuse. And I think that that's a good thing, and we should be pleased about that. I don't think we should pretend like the problem has gone away. So.
Terry, thanks very much. I hope that was helpful to you. I don't know if you've been doing all this reading. Maybe there's a Catholic Answers book that you would like. If there's one that we published that you'd like, just tell Edgar. I'll put you on hold, and you can talk to Edgar, and we'll send it off to you. And The Cordial Catholic, I really like that podcast. K. Albert Little from Canada. He is cordial, and if you like it, you should listen to episode 113.
Okay.
Yeah, episode 113 is the best episode that he's done.
Okay, what's that one?
Mark, what do you think it is? Who do you think was the guest on that episode? Who do you think might have been the guest on episode 113 of The Cordial Catholic with K. Albert Little?
Cy Kellett, perhaps?
Yeah. Bingo! Right back with more Open Forum with Mark Brumley right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, "When we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue." Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Isn't it awesome that we today do not recognize His presence in the Eucharist? Is it because we really don't go to Him in humbleness of heart and say, Lord, I don't believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I want to see you. I want to recognize you. I cannot live without you. Are we saying that?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Mark Brumley, our guest. Mark Brumley, the president of Ignatius Press. And you are welcome to call with your questions. And I'm going to give you the number again because we actually have a couple lines open, 888-318-7884. And while you're calling, we'll talk to Kathleen in Minnesota listening on 1280 AM. Kathleen, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Mark Brumley.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for taking my question here. It's kind of a question and kind of a comment, but I'm going to ask, is it bearing false witness when people approach the Catholic belief system and don't know anything about it to call the church the whore of Babylon? Would that not be bearing false witness? And it's like, it's just the audacity to say something that isn't true, and they may think it in their head, but don't have, I mean, it's not true. So I guess I get frustrated when I hear that stuff. So my comment is, it's like, my question is, isn't that bearing false witness when somebody is accusatory like that without anything to back it up?
Mark?
I think so. I think this certainly applies, we'd say, when people without any real knowledge of the Catholic Church, they've never made a serious effort to find out how the Catholic Church understands Catholicism. They may have read things that critics of the Catholic Church have said, but that's not really fair. I mean, you really should hear both sides to a thing, and to use a term like the Whore of Babylon, which in the Bible, in the biblical context, is the enemy of God's people and the enemy of Jesus Christ. That's a pretty severe thing, and we're all going to be held accountable for what we say about other people and other churches and other institutions. So if we're going to say something critical, we better be well informed, or probably best not to say anything.
Kathleen, what do you think?
Well, I think that's spot on, and kind of sometimes, I always forget to do this, but sometimes when people say things that are so startling, misrepresenting the church, I would like to go back and just say, well, excuse me, but you're bearing false witness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's breaking a commandment, and certainly not that we all need a comeback, but it's just...
Well, I do. I actually do sometimes, because I've told this before, but I always remember the time a guy just said to me, Catholic Church does nothing for the poor. And I only had like 5 seconds with this guy, and I was just stunned. Like,
right.
I don't even know what to, and I wish I had a comeback like, well, that's bearing false witness. And then the ball's in his court if he wants to continue it. So I am one of those people who needs a comeback, because I can't think of what to say spontaneously when people say crazy stuff like that.
Breaking a commandment is pretty serious business, and it's like, at least you should find out, like you said, from the other, if you're going to quote somebody, at least go to their source and find out what they actually teach versus what somebody else thinks they teach.
Right.
Amen,
right.
sister.
And Jesus said that we're going to be accountable for every idle word we speak. So
I'm feeling bad now about what I said about Ozzy Osbourne a little while ago. I'm going to take it all back.
Yeah, man, Ozzy's after you, man. He's
well, I'm not worried about Ozzy. He's not. That's not the one I'm worried about. I'm worried about the one who gave the commandment.
There you go.
Kathleen, thank you very, very much. A very helpful point. And
by the way, I want to add something to this, Kathleen.
Okay.
In apologetics, you can, because we get in arguments and all that, and we try to be charitable and try to be fair, but sometimes, and I find this especially when Catholics sometimes talk about Protestants, they speak in a very generalized way, and we have to be careful because, sometimes we're not fair. One of the things that Vatican II emphasized when it talks about how Catholics should be, the way in which Catholics should be ecumenical, is that we make sure that we accurately represent the views of our Protestant separated brethren. Just because they're separated and we think they're mistaken on points doesn't mean all bets are off. We can say whatever we want about it. So we have to be careful ourselves that we don't succumb to bearing false witness.
Again, thank you, Kathleen, very, very much. I'm going to go to Lacey now in Pennsylvania, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Lacey, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Mark.
Hi, Si and Mark. So I just had a question on my heart. It's been pretty heavy because I've just really been discerning Catholicism for the past about 6 months, and I believe it to be true. But long story short is I haven't been baptized, and I was really wondering if I were to die, per se, before getting baptized and coming into the church, would I go to hell? It's a pretty pointed question.
So you dropped out at a very unfortunate second, but you said you have not been baptized. So you want to know, this is an actual question about reality. You've never been baptized. Would you go to hell if you died right now?
Yes, because
Okay.
I want to come into the church. That's definitely what I'm looking to do going forward and finding a local parish. But I'm concerned right now, like in that in-between process.
Yep.
Would I get hell if I?
Great,
So
Lacey, thank you.
I don't think you should be unduly concerned. If you're repentant for your sins, and you're looking to come into full communion with God through Jesus Christ in the Holy Spirit through the community of His church, then that's what God asks of you and wants of you right now. And so I don't think you should worry or be unduly fearful that something's going to happen to you and you're not going to get to be baptized and so on. You have an implicit baptism of desire in the sense that, well, it's more like explicit. You want to be baptized, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
can I read a passage from the Catechism on this, Mark?
Excellent. Please do.
Paragraph 1249. You're not a catechumen yet, but you're approaching it. Catechumens are already joined to the church. They are already of the household of Christ and are quite frequently already living a life of faith, hope, and charity. With love and solicitude, Mother Church already embraces them as her own. So that's the official teaching of the Catholic Church on those who are catechumens not baptized yet.
Okay, definitely. Thank you. That helps so much. Could I do a follow-up question on that?
Heck yeah.
Yeah, because that's been frightening me because I've been scared that if I die, then I'm going to be in hell. So that's been really heavy on my heart the past month. Because essentially, so if somebody isn't considered a Christian until they're baptized, then does God even know who I am right now, or is He not in relationship with me?
God knows
Does
who
that
you
make
are.
sense?
He's known who you are from the moment of your conception in the womb of your mother. He's known who you are and loves you. And He wants you to come into full communion with Him. So, and it sounds like you're being responsive to His love and His grace by seeking that out. So, you should not think or feel that God does not know who you are, or that you're not visible, or you're not within the ambit of His love, because you are.
Definitely. Thank you so much. It's just been really scrupulous on my part because I've just been really scared that and then I wouldn't be in union with the Lord for eternity. So thank you.
Well, it's good that you take these things seriously. We just can't take them seriously in a way that makes us, again, unduly fearful or actually becomes an impediment to experiencing God's love. So that's what I would say.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Lacey. Lacey, we have a book called Why We're Catholic. If you, as you approach your entry into the church, if you'd like a copy of that book, I'd love to send it to you. We'll just get your information and we'll send it off. And you don't have to take it, but you're welcome to it. Just hang on. Edgar will get your information and we'll send it off to you. Mark, I asked this Thomist priest, real Thomist guy, like old-fashioned Thomist one time. I said, what does Thomas Aquinas say about this? And I couldn't point you to this, but I just remember being immediately, he said, Thomas Aquinas says, what joins you to the Catholic Church is faith. You have to take the other steps. You're obligated to the other steps.
Right.
But what joins you to the Catholic Church is faith.
Right, because faith is your free response, free grace-enabled response to God and God's self-disclosure, giving Himself to us in the person of Jesus Christ. That's what faith is. Now, that doesn't mean, well, if I have faith, then I don't have to worry about baptism, I don't have to worry about Eucharist, I don't have to worry about anything else. Because if you have genuine faith, that faith is an impetus to baptism. Because baptism is the sacrament by which we not only have the impetus of faith moving us towards union with Christ, but we actually have the infusion or the sort of being sealed in the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and we become marked and sealed as children of God in a way that prior to baptism we're moving in that direction, but we're not there yet. That doesn't mean that we don't have some share in divine grace before that, and if we have love of God in our heart, even before baptism, we're in union with God. Again, it doesn't mean these other things are irrelevant.
No, right. But it does mean that Lacey doesn't have to be afraid as she approaches the church
Absolutely.
That she missed the deadline or something.
Yeah.
Lacey, thanks for the call. I hope that was indeed helpful to you. It's always such good news when we hear of people approaching the Catholic Church. It's a perfect time to do it because all around the world, RCIA programs often get started. So check them out if you're thinking of becoming Catholic. Mark Brumley, thanks. It's always great. Enjoyed the hour.
Great being with you.
All right, back to your Taylor Swift CDs. And we'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.